Welcome to the God is Not an Asshole podcast. If you are one of the many people done with religious dogmatism, hang on. You might sense transcendence, but your church or other faith community never seem to get off the ground. You realize that honoring your conscience means more than fitting in and keeping hard to explain rules? Hang on. You could probably think of the goodness in your tradition, and you tried your best to save that baby, but there's so much bathwater. Join your hosts, David Norman Moore Jr. in California and Carrie Connolly in New Jersey, who are collaborating to bring on guests who have found life on the other side of fundamentalism. Guests with stories of how they have liberated themselves from beliefs that divide us from each other. None of our guests' narratives are identical, but we hope you'll find something in common with each of them. We invite you to experience our common bond as we all inspire even more of us to embrace the true self.
Hey, Carrie, this is Mac James, who I know as Gene James because, that's who he was. And really, Mac has always been his name, too. But was that to distinguish you from your dad?
Yeah.
That they called you Gene? Okay.
Yeah.
So we're really grateful because it is 6 a.m. There in New Zealand.
Ooh, thank you.
So I hope you have like maybe coffee or something there.
No, I'm good. I'll have a stiff green mushroom tea thing maybe when we're done. I've done my Wim Hof for the morning.
It's 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon for me. It's in the afternoon for me. I'm still needing coffee. So I'm impressed officially.
So I have to say, Mac, that I've been really looking forward to this conversation / reunion. You were here in the States, in Santa Barbara visiting. When was it now?
That would have been 2016.
It was before COVID, right?
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. So, because, you grew up here, your family, most of your family is here. And, I have really, again, been really looking forward to this for a number of reasons. But when I invited you, your reply was something like, "Are you sure you have the right person?" And tell me why you, replied that way.
I guess really it's sort of like I don't really think of myself as being particularly interesting. Nor do I I just, and then I think also when I looked at I clicked the link and I was no, you sent me a link after, and I think that even made me more, but I was like, why would anybody want to interview me about or ask me questions on a podcast about anything? So that was sort of it's like, what? But yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to do it.
Well, one of the reasons that I reached out to you is because we have some shared history. And, we were affiliated. I was a teacher and you were a student at a Christian school connected to a church here in Santa Barbara. And we have both had to really have some reformation in our lives, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess you'd call it that. And also there are so many other students, former students who, may not track exactly with you, but have had to, really change, recover. And in a few weeks, we're going to have, I don't know if you recognize the name Mickey Morelli.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. She's awesome. I haven't seen her in a really long time. We were in our early 20s last time I saw her. Yeah.
Wow. Well, we've kind of stayed in touch. In fact, I did her wedding several years ago, and she's a cosmetologist. And if I want to get some kind of treatment, which I've only done once, but she'll insist that I come in and get something for free because, we had a connection back then. And when I invited her to do this show, she just said, yeah, it's time for me to come forward and tell my story. So that's probably a pretty loaded statement, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah, totally.
I think that is a loaded statement because I think it speaks to the power that voices from our childhood have in our psyche, especially when those voices are in any way associated with God, right? Or who have taken on the representation of God, right? That those can be incredibly powerful voices in our heads that then kind of feed everything that we do. And it takes so much, it really takes an act of will and self-agency to question those voices, right?
Certainly. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say that you don't see yourself as interesting. What a story. I mean, just the fact that you're living in New Zealand, but you called England home for a long time. Tell us about that. What happened with you?
So do you want to know how I started? So if we just take it from the point of traveling, I had always wanted to travel. My best mate growing up, he's from, well, he was born in the States, but was raised in, spent a bit of time in England. Both of his parents are from the UK. And anyway, so I was regaled with tales of stories, and then grew up watching PBS, Jeeves and Wooster, and Masterpiece Theatre and all that sort of. So you got this real polished up illusion of, especially a kid coming from we had a really my parents made ends meet most of the time. But we had a very challenging I had a very challenging upbringing on a lot of levels, but finances were always a real challenge for us. I guess I stopped short of saying we were poor, but that we were. Anyway, so once I realized, I remember one day I was 5 years old. I was on the Riviera. We're driving over the Riviera, looking out at the scenery there, and looking out at the ocean. And I asked my mum, and I said, "Oh, are you? Is this the world?" And she's like, "Oh, no, mijo, it's much, much bigger than this." And so I was like, "Oh, well, I want to see it." And so that was a really pivotal moment in my own sort of intellect, where I just was like, "Oh, right. So we've got a job to do here." Little did I know the extent of the journey I'd go on. But so I left the States around 2004 or 5, and then spent most of that time in England. Did a year in Ecuador, in Cuenca, with my wife, who was doing her doctoral research there. So I got to serve as sort of I don't know, we call it sort of a field supervisor in a way. I had already finished my dissertation, and so I was working on corrections, and then also just was there so she could bounce ideas off of. I've also got a background in for better or worse, anthropology and sociology. So it allowed me to kind of get in there. And then when we got pregnant, or say when she got pregnant, I was there to eat the foods that she was offered and drink the drinks that she was offered, because you've got to accept those things. So we went, so that was always really interesting. And then we came back, had our son, and then after another few years, we decided to move to New Zealand. It was time. The political situation in England. So right before Brexit. Brexit was the last bit of voting I did. I voted against Brexit, if anybody's curious.
Wow.
And the hostility was palpable. Being a foreigner, although I was a citizen, passport, but getting called out on the bus for being a foreigner, and it just would just get off the bus. I'm not going to sit there and, get into a shouting match with someone in front of my child. on a bus. It doesn't make any sense. So, I just, I got really, really intense.
How did they know you were a foreigner?
My accent.
Oh. Then if you came to the States now, you would be called a foreigner.
I feel like a foreigner when I'm there.
You have.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
That's really interesting for people who are listening and don't get to see us, who are only listening. From my perspective, from where I'm sitting right here, you look like a white-bodied man, right? And I think it's interesting that you're in this liminal space, right? This place where you're experiencing what so many people who look like you here in the States might do to another person, right? Some of us, not all of us, but some of us who look like us might respond to other people in that way. And I just think that's interesting that you're walking in that liminal embodiment. That's a fascinating space, I think. And it's a space of bridging things, right? As we talked about Reverend Jackie Lewis the other day, but she talks about that in her book about walking in different, you can understand what it's like to be an American, and you can also understand what it's like to not be an American, to be a foreigner. Not that I did not say that well. I othered everybody else who wasn't American when I said that just now, but you can walk that liminal space. And I think that's really fascinating.
I think it's important to note at this point, that, although I present as a white cis male, just given, I call it I have a melanin deficiency. I'm half Mexican. So, my name and color fool people quite often. I have to acknowledge my white privilege. I've got it like a stamp right here. But growing up mixed race, I think I think that's the correct terminology these days. That had its own ups and downs. That had its, own sets of trauma that went with it. I was much darker, especially as a teen. I was much, much darker. I'd, really just sort of black hair and bald now. My head's cold. That's why I'm wearing a cap. So I had that sort of constant juxtaposition, I think, where you don't feel quite right in your space at any point in time. I definitely felt that way coming up in school. I saw more racism. My introduction to direct racism was Christian school. That was, yeah. It wasn't at the school.
Thank you for clarifying and for correcting me. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, it's not a problem. It happens to me quite often. Even here, and we're considered to be quite progressive over here. And, I say here, I'm a resident, permanent resident here in New Zealand now. So, I'll get to vote this year, which is pretty exciting. But even here, I've encountered situations where presumptions are made, or I was talking to a friend of mine, who's Maori, and we were, got our decolonization jokes happening, and, we're kind of chuckling it up. And, I had someone say, well, you can't speak that way. You can't talk that way. So then I've got to identify. You're always coming out in a sense. I've always got to sort of pull my papers out. Actually, I'm this, I'm not what you perceive me to be. I'm something much, much more. And the breadth of my experience is something much, much more. And, so for me, it's really important that I make that correction. And my son, he looks like a little surfer boy. And he is here in New Zealand. If you're in the States, we'd say of Indigenous descent, you are just Indigenous here. There's a real push against blood quantum. A good friend of mine spent a lot of time touring in the US as going to a lot of different meetups as a Maori man, and learning and sharing. And he was really taken aback by all of the infighting and pretendians and all the terminologies. And I understand why some of those things are there, because you do have people who are saying, oh, well, look, I'm this. I'm a 16th this, so I'm this. But yet we lack the experience. You have not lived the life of a Native person in the United States. Just because you're a 16th, hey, great, that's awesome. That's your doorway. Open that door, go in and learn. Shut your mouth, empty your brain, and learn. And yeah, that's been a really important journey for me as well, coming out of Christianity. But the acceptance. So there's an expectation amongst my Maori colleagues and friends that I own my indigeneity, and even to the point where they said, "Here, you put it on your CV, you put it on your resume. Your what would be considered tribal affiliation, and all that." I just leave mine as Indigenous Mexican, but it's there. So it's a very, very different thing.
As you're talking, I'm thinking I'm going to send this podcast to some of my Indigenous friends who have this conversation among themselves particularly, but sometimes I get to eavesdrop, and, this conversation is ongoing of people, assuming an Indigenous identity without an Indigenous experience. So I appreciate you saying that.
I think the racial context in the United States is so particular, right? Because of the hierarchy of whiteness that everybody's trying to get onto, right? I didn't mean to speak over you. Sorry.
Oh, no. No. That's okay. I don't remember this. I think that there are many, many people in the United States, and even here, and probably, I think this is anytime we involve colonization and Indigenous peoples, we have that collision, and some of us get in that explosion. Some people get flung, and I kind of see myself, people like me, who became disconnected through family. And I mean, I don't want to go into huge details about telling my family story, because it's really going to take us in the wrong direction. But
why would it be the wrong direction, Mac?
Well, no. I wasn't sure if we were here to talk about coming out of Christianity, or I'm happy to talk about whatever.
That too. But we're here to talk about you and your journey.
So I did a lot of research, extensive research. I'm a researcher. Well, I have a PhD, which makes you a researcher by trade. By that point, and a bit mental, I suppose. I should only speak for myself, but so I applied the same skill set and did a lot of research in my family history, and then was able to pinpoint us. There was a lot of infighting. My grandfather, he, how do I say this? He wanted to be an awesome American. He wasn't. He was from Mexico, and there was a lot of it. He said he was from Arizona, and he was not. And eventually, I found the actual documentation to prove that. My grandmother was the only person who held firm and said, "No, he's not American. He's Mexican." But he had all the paperwork. And the thing about it is that, the environment, what you see is a real shift. I think it was looking back at the census records, I think it occurs roughly in the 1930s. Suddenly he starts appearing as an American. And this is before there was any sort of a real amnesty or anything, because at this time, obviously they're scooping up Mexicans and just dropping them back into Mexico. So he's in that hostile environment.
That's when they developed the term wetbacks.
Yep. One of my favorites.
Yeah.
And so I can't. I think what happened in that process was me starting to understand, hopefully, maybe understanding him a bit better. He did what he needed to do to protect his family. He did what he needed to do to provide for his family.
Yeah.
In an environment that I've never lived in. I don't know what it was like to live back then. So yes, that it caused a lot of strife actually within my mom's family, the family history. But at the end of the day, you go and you stop listening to legends. You look for the truth. What are the kernels of truth? And then how can I grow those? And for me, that's really what it was about. And what we found was my grandmother's opinions, and a lot of what she said was generally dismissed. There was a lot of opinions about her personality and who she was, and that weren't always positive. And the thing is that what I found time after time, it's been like 10 for 10, is that she was telling the truth. I actually found documents to back up what she was saying. And I was just like, oh, there you have it. And so that was a really unique journey. And that was my son was right there with me for it. And so it was cool. And that was something that I did here. I started it in the UK and really got stuck in here.
So, when we had this conversation, I don't know, a few weeks ago, you mentioned that your transgender son is in a much healthier environment there in New Zealand.
Oh, yeah.
Can you unpack that for us?
I'll try to stay composed. Here, what I would say is my son lives in the light. There's even within the community here amongst parents, and it's different the region you live in. It's going to be different anywhere you go. There's no uniform sort of situation for people. And I don't want to speak for all parents of trans children or the community, but so far what I've learned is that we're really lucky to be in Wellington. And Wellington reminds me quite a bit of certain aspects of it. Remind me quite a bit of San Francisco, like back in the early 90s. It's a very different place to when I was last there, but it's very progressive. And I'd say, like, talking to people initially when I arrived here, talking to people who were National Party supporters, what I found was that they were sort of akin to moderate Democrats. I'm just trying to put some perspective. I don't want to go down a political trail here, but just to kind of create some perspective there, for better or worse. So, but it was quite easy to find common ground. I think that was where I was going with that. We definitely, there's differences of opinion, but that's what they are. And you can be friends with people, and they support different parties. But anyway, so what I've found is that for my son's experience here, he can live his life. He can be out. You get on the bus, you see, kids who are non-binary, transgender. We had a transgendered bus driver, who was, everybody loved her. She was in the paper. Sadly, she passed on a couple of years ago, but, used to see her every day. And she was just there living her life, being a human being. And of course, we've got, and even in politics, there are people who are transgendered who are out serving the public. And we recently lost quite a famous, trans politician who really broke some boundaries. So, and I think a lot of this has to play, and I'm not an expert, so I don't want to go too far down this road, but in context to, Pacifica Maori culture, sort of, in a broader sense, Polynesian culture and different views of gender there. I would assume play some sort of role. I've had other friends who are from here mention that, so I'm going to go with that for now. But
I think that probably that it makes sense probably to, at that point, steer us toward the question of Christianity, right? Because so much of our ideology around gender identity in general, even there's so many paradigms that come from Christianity that are considered the right normal way to be, the things that have been codified into our society, and essentially exclude so many human beings in so many beautiful forms that we all come in, right? So
yes.
Can you help me understand a little bit more, since I don't have the pleasure of knowing you already, about your history with Christianity?
I don't want to go down. I don't want to like tell my parents' story, because that's not. But I just want to say that so my mom became a Christian, I think around 1975, something around there. My dad was roughly, I want to say 1977, 78, somewhere in there. So they were kind of, I guess, involved in sort of the Jesus people movement, which, you can wiki that, public. It's going way back. So I remember as a small child, there's kind of a shift in the household when my dad became a Christian, and we were in church all the time, and specifically in kindergarten, I remember the pressure of like every Friday, pressure to accept Jesus as my Lord and personal Savior. Have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? And I see so many kids in a lot of videos on YouTube or whatever, and they go, well, I've been a Christian since I was 5, and I'm 15 now, so I know what it's about. I'm like, oh, sweetheart, I know what you're going through, because I've been there too. And I don't look at them with pity. It grieves me. So I think for myself, that was sort of the beginning of a continuous sort of pressure cooker that I was in for the next, I guess till I was about, well, definitely till I was 18 and I left the house the first time. but I really, by the time I was 17, I totally checked out. I was going through the motions. I was just going there. But in the interim of that, I would say the theme was trauma. Continuous trauma. And I only know that now looking back. And I'm still transitioning into psychology. So I've got a master's I need to finish. But so I think the more I took that journey, and the more I delved into myself with therapy, the more I could look back and see what exactly happened to me during those years. Because I didn't fully understand it. I just knew I was really, really angry. Very angry. And I didn't quite know why. You can say, oh, well, you were repressed. I didn't get to listen to the music I wanted to listen to. And, I was forced to go to church and all these things. But it was more than that. It was the fact that, the people, realizing that the people in power were feeding me as a small child a steady diet of bigotry, misogyny, hate. And just the overarching sort of self-righteous concept that we are Christians and we're better than everyone else. We're better than the people in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's just not true. we all have, we all have
certain
value.
Requirement. Yeah, there's a certain requirement of certainty mm-hmm. that is embedded into the fundamentalist Christian faith, right? That there is no room for doubt or questioning or exploration which I think is one of the most fascinating aspects of relationship with the divine, is this opportunity that we have to explore and to learn more, right? And but there's this certainty that so to your point, you have to align with this bigotry and hatred and misogyny and legalism and all of these things, and then you have to also be really, really certain about it all.
Yeah,
right?
And if it's not working out,
questions.
That's your fault.
Right.
Yeah, it's your fault if it's not working out for you.
Yes.
Because your faith isn't strong enough.
Right. Correct. Wow.
I'm just taking a breath right now because I feel like there's I don't even think that this is fully measurable in terms of enculturation and politicization and colonization. I mean, it's all of those things. And it's almost
capitalism.
It is capitalism. Yeah. So
whiteness too.
Yeah.
Whiteness. Yeah.
So in a way, it's inescapable, but we have to escape.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, spot on. Yeah, we do. And it was, I felt like there was a point in my childhood where I kind of broke. I'm dyslexic amongst also a few other learning disabilities. And so it's quite common in dyslexics that we'll have an early sort of onset of depression as a child. And this really comes on, especially when you hit puberty. And so for me, what happened was that came on in a rush. I didn't know what I was experiencing, what I was going through at all. And at certain points I even felt suicidal. I just wanted to die. And the only thing anyone ever did was pray for me. And I'm sorry, that's not enough. Especially with a child, that's not enough. And I understand there's levels of ignorance at the time, and what we know now and what people may know now about certain things like dyslexia is different to, 40 years ago. So I accept that. But I mean, even the school I was put in was not equipped to handle children with learning disabilities at all. Nobody was trained there. It's to my knowledge. I could be wrong, but nobody to my knowledge was trained. So because of that, my dyslexia was something that I was punished for again and again and again and again. I spent hours and hours in detention because I couldn't write. I just couldn't write correctly. So, and that's again, that's one of my learning disabilities. So there was nothing I could have ever done about it, but just persistently being punished.
So
yeah.
Mac,
sorry. Yes.
This is, we were on different sides of the same experience, different parts of the same experience. And, I've had to recover in a different way from that experience. But I'm wondering, if at all, how you remember my presence as part of the cabal, the part of the, faculty or.
Looking back, I think, like, as a kid, you knocked my socks off with music. Like, you opened a door, and I remember you teaching us in choir, and when we were in your choir class, everybody was just doing it. Everybody's just singing, and I remember those moments not feeling so awkward, and you'd feel the spirit come in, and it was like this safe place that I got this moment of sort of relief. I think also as a PE teacher, you kind of had this balance of being fun, but then at the same time, keeping us in line. But but I think my sort of key moment was when you read the "I Have a Dream" speech in chapel, and I felt, I can't put it fully into words other than to say it was the first time I had heard the whole speech, and then secondly, now I'd almost call it as it was almost felt subversive, but in the best way possible. I felt like you were opening a door and I was getting a peek through there and I was understanding something that I wasn't, like, I didn't totally get it yet, but I have skin in that game, and so I think it was, it was an early kind of, to use Christian terminologies, like sort of seed planting, in the best way possible. But I think it started to get me to question.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Well, until you mentioned those things, I completely forgot choir. I forgot PE. I mean, I don't remember reading that speech. Well, at least now until you mentioned it. Here it is almost 4 decades after the fact. And those are not the things I remember. I do remember that I had an uphill climb because I thought the whole experience could be transformed in some way, but I didn't feel like I had the influence or the power or the knowledge to do that. So I don't remember those things, or didn't remember those things until you brought them up, which is kind of ironic that those are the things you remember. And I just remember, the teaching part.
What's interesting, I think, about that, and one of the things that I think is so important to remember and is being demonstrated so beautifully here, is that there is a real difference between positions of power and positions of influence. And you don't necessarily need to have a position of power or to have immense influence, right? And to create a safe space for another human being, to be able to have the influence to create a safe space for another human being is that's actually deeply powerful, because you created, as he said, you've created this seed that was planted that paved the way for something very different and much more beautiful, I think.
I think we came across was that you saw things differently than all the other teachers and everybody. And what I didn't fully realize at the time, it wasn't solely because you're an African-American man, which was definitely playing a role in that, but just you are another human being who brings a lens to the table. So with the whole package, I think, I feel blessed and lucky to have met you at that time in my life, and to start to look at things different, to have that seed of, wait, you gotta just turn this a little. You gotta just look at this a little bit differently. And, I didn't get that again till I was 15. I had a history teacher at Center River High School. His name was Gordon Weber. He was the volleyball coach. And I don't remember how it happened, but he ended up teaching history that semester. And, what was really amazing, unique about him was that, there's lots, but to me at the time, it was a mind blower. He was a Zen Buddhist and his wife was a Christian. And at 15, still going to church. And at this point, my world's being rocked. This is my first year being in a public school, which I had fought for years and years and years. And then I finally got it. And I didn't realize it at the time because it just felt awkward. But I realized, looking back, there was so many social skills that I'd never learned because they don't offer those classes in fundamentalism. Just how to interact with people, how, all these things, because you're in this place of continuous self-righteousness. And then you get into a biology class. What do I just remember I left the biology class because I couldn't. It's like, does not compute. Like, this isn't working.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today. We are people who have left behind performance-based religion and the shame that comes with it. Maybe you have a personal liberation story to tell and we want to know about it. Please contact us on Twitter at God is not an asshole or text 805-703-8393 because the world needs to know that God is not an asshole.